I'm sure many of you are familiar with The Ring, but if you weren't, I bet that made you feel really good that we were going to do 15 hours in an hour and 15 minutes. Wagner was extraordinary in many ways. He changed the face of theater, he changed the face of opera, he changed the face of music. Obviously, he felt comfortable writing operas in a much more expanded time scale than any composer or dramatist before him had ever imagined. The time scale for the actual composition of The Ring is also extraordinary. This piece, from conception to completion, was 26 years in the making. So while Wagner was doing other things on the side, like writing Tristan and Isolde or Die Meistersinger von Nuremberg, he wrote The Ring, starting with the final scene in text only in 1848 and completing the final bar in 1874. So as you can see, this was a lifetime project. And I think what's truly extraordinary is that in addition to being full of superb music, it raises just about every issue that human beings confront. There is virtually nothing that remains untouched by the Ring of the Nibelungen. Every composer, when they write an opera, has the opportunity to put human themes that are important to them into that opera. So, for example, Mozart's operas tend to focus on, if I am in love with somebody, will that somebody remain faithful? That is a key theme for Mozart, and it comes out in all of his mature, when he wasn't 12, all of his mature operas. So, for Verdi, there were two themes, I suppose we could say. One was having a country for Italians, and the other was having operas about jealousy, and sometimes those blended into the same opera. But he, too, had his pet themes. Puccini tended to write about women who loved so much that they would sacrifice their lives. Well, Wagner's theme is redemption. Redemption for the human race, redemption for men, often through the agency of a woman. But in this opera, in addition to the redemption theme, Wagner examines just about everything he can about human nature and society. He lived at a time when philosophers in the German-speaking world were re-examining what God meant. And the opening of the whole Ring is a depiction of the creation of the world, the creation of the universe, through the river Rhine. Now, forgive me when I just say something a little technical. By this time period, great German composers naturally associated high spiritual concepts with the key of E-flat major. And there's a reason for that. But it begins with the magic flute, it's Mozart's magic flute, and it continues through Beethoven's Fidelio, and then Weber's Freischütz. And sure enough, when Wagner wants to show the beginning spiritual principle that precedes actual existence, he uses that key. So he not only uses that key, but he uses it so slowly that it's almost in real time for the creation of the universe. But since I'm doing this in an hour and 15 minutes, I'm going to compress everything. You may have noticed that we're still in E-flat major. The ingredients that go into the universe, into life, into creation, in Wagner's mind are chordal. They're not only tonal, but they remain on the same chord, and they're undisturbed. Wagner sets up a duality in the whole Ring cycle between chordal things, which are based on the primitive elements of the world, the unchanging, undisturbed by humans, and elements that are scales that represent human intervention and human change in the world. Not always negative, but he certainly makes that dichotomy very clear. The Rheingold begins with 3 Rhine maidens, and the Rhine maidens protect the treasure of the Rhine, which is a magic hoard of gold. Enter, to disturb the play of these 3 idyllic maidens, Alberich. Alberich is a Nibelung. He is from an underground race of dwarves, and the title of the whole ring cycle is Der Ring des Nibelungen. And the Nibelung they're referring to in the title is Alberich. So he is really the title character of the entire ring cycle. The ring at the beginning of the ring cycle doesn't exist. Alberich comes and is trying to seduce one of the Rhine maidens, anyone, it doesn't matter which one. But he's chasing them all around, and because they're in their native element of water in the Rhine, of course he can't catch them. But one of them says rather carelessly, of course, there is a mythic magical prophecy that says if someone were willing to renounce human love and not chase Rhine maidens around or anybody else, they could own and inherit all the wealth that is in the Rhine. Now, whoever created this ancient myth clearly felt very confident that no human being would be capable of complete renunciation of love. They didn't count on this Nibelung named Alberich, because Alberich stands up, renounces love, the Rhine maidens go shrieking away in terror, and he now possesses the entire treasure of the Rhine. The orchestra tells us this immediately because all of this beautiful serenity of E-flat major is completely disturbed, and we leave any key center that would give us any feeling of harmony or peace. And indeed the world, now that Alberich has done this, has been thrown into disharmony. Peace is over, because once a human being can have a value other than just connecting to their fellow human beings with love, what will the world become? It's a good question now, it was a good question then. Wagner takes us up to the realm of the gods at this point. Now the gods are, in Wagner's epic, the gods of Norse mythology, renamed by their German names. So Odin becomes Wotan, Freya is his wife, and, Fricka, his wife is Fricka, and Fricka has a sister named Freya. Freya takes care of all the golden apples that enable the gods to be immortal. There's also Loge, whom you know, the god of fire. Thor becomes Donner, the god of thunder, and his brother Fro. So all the happy gods are living in their celestial bliss, and the new real estate is that Fricka has persuaded Wotan to build them all a grand palace that he's going to call Valhalla. So Valhalla isn't just a palace for the gods, it's also the place where all of the fallen soldiers who die nobly in battle will be taken, not just any old way, but on the back of a flying horse with a Valkyrie as their guide. Now, what are Valkyries? Wotan is undoubtedly the most promiscuous character. I can't say person because he's divine, but he's the most promiscuous character in all of literature. And he has thousands of children by thousands of different women scattered all over the universe. But he has 9 very special children, because Erda, the goddess of the earth, whose other name is Vala, has 9 daughters with him. She has nonuplets. And these girls grow into the most extraordinary warriors in the world. They fly on these magical flying horses, and they collect the dead at the end of every battle who have fought bravely enough to deserve to go to Valhalla. So, how did Wotan build Valhalla? Now, this is where the divine and the human mix. Apparently, he can't just wave his fingers and say, I want a huge palace. Plus, there wouldn't be much of a story. So, he in fact engages two giants, Fasolt and Fafner. And Fasolt and Fafner agree to build this magnificent castle for him. But they don't agree to do it with no price. Wotan rather rashly tells them that he will let them take Fricka's sister, Freya, remember the one who tends the golden apples, and that Freya can live with them, and that then they too can be immortal. Now, while we don't see a lot of giants, at the time of this epic, giants were the main race inhabiting the surface of the earth. The underground is inhabited by the Nibelungs, and the heavens by the gods Wotan and company, but the giants are the main creature who lives on the earth. So these giants naturally feel that Wotan has made a promise and that he'll keep his promise. All right, let's go back to the music for a second. You know that Wagner, in order to create his vast operas, used a compositional technique which, although it wasn't completely new, he certainly took to a far greater level than any composer before him, and that is the Leitmotif, the leading motive. The musical theme, which whether it's 2 notes or 20 notes, tells us what character, what feeling, what idea or concept we're dealing with, so that when different characters come together in a scene, he can tell us through this musical language what else is being referred to. So the theme for the River Rhine, you heard. And for the Rhine maidens. Notice it's also really just one chord. The theme for Valhalla is almost in one chord. Again, a very stately theme in D flat major. The gods themselves, looking at the space that will soon be theirs, Valhalla, whenever they sing about it, they're immediately accompanied by the orchestra with that music. So that's the essence of the Leitmotif technique. Now, there is one member of this godly society who isn't fully divine. He's only half god and he's half human, and that is Loge, the god of fire. This gives him both advantages and disadvantages, and the advantages are that he's much more clever than the gods because he's had to live by his wits for much of eternity. Loge's music, by the way, is not centered around a single chord. Because he is half human, we always hear him moving chromatically. All of these chromatic figures depict Loge. All right, so I have to move forward here. Fricka begins to suspect that the bargain Wotan made with the giants isn't going to turn out so well, because either he has to go back on his word, or they have to give up Freya, which means giving up the golden apples. The giants come in, and here is the leitmotif of the brother giants, Fasolt and Fafner. Very heavy orchestra. Now, one thing that I cannot do for you today is the incredible color of a full Wagner orchestra on this lovely piano. Wagner, as I said, made many changes, including inventing new instruments for the orchestra, which we call Wagner tubas. In sound, they are somewhere between a French horn and a trombone, but he wanted something that had more gravitas than a French horn, and yet was more mellow and beautiful in its timbre than a trombone. So the orchestra for the entire ring has 4 additional Wagner tubas and about 16 other brass instruments. It's quite gigantic. It includes, if you really do it the way Wagner asks us to, 6 harps and dozens and dozens of strings in every department, quadruple winds, lots of percussion. I get away from myself. All right, so we're back to those giants. And those giants, quite reasonably, are saying, please pay what you promised you would pay. And the response that Wotan gives is, once Loge gets here, we'll work it out. Well, the giants aren't really willing to accept those terms. And there's Donner, the sort of one who has no anger management skills, threatening to just destroy the giants and crush them right now. And they say, we don't want to fight, we just want our payment. So at the last moment, Loge shows up, and he says, there's some important news on another part of the world, and that is that Alberich has just stolen the gold from the Rhine. And he says, provocatively, so the giants can overhear him, anybody who possesses that gold would be able to have dominion over the entire world. And at that point, the giants aren't so interested in Freya. They say, well, is there a way that you could get that gold, Wotan, you all-powerful god, you, and give it to us? And Wotan says, how can I give you what I don't have? But Loge says, I'm sure that something can be arranged. And the giants take Freya away as ransom, and they say, well, when you get the gold, we'll give you Freya back. So now Wotan and Loge take a long journey from Valhalla all the way down into the underground, where they find Alberich. Alberich, who took the gold from the Rhine maidens by renouncing love forever, has all of the other Nibelung dwarfs in his slavery, and they are working day and night, including Alberich's own brother, Mime. Now, Mime is also an extraordinary smith and goldsmith. So Mime has created 2 incredible treasures from this gold. One is called the Tarnhelm. It's a little light helmet that you can wear, and the Tarnhelm enables you to assume any form at all, including complete invisibility. But even more extraordinarily, he has made a ring. And this ring would enable the possessor to have complete power over everything. This is the hinge of the story. Alberich is a very proud dwarf, and when Wotan and Loge appear, he stops his work, having all of the other dwarves doing their smithing, which we hear as they beat their hammers on anvils. So Loge says, I understand that you have this power, but surely you, a mere dwarf, can't figure out how to wield it. Well, the mere dwarf turns himself into a dragon and shows Loge that in fact even a dwarf can handle power. Loge says, yes, that's impressive, but it would be far more difficult, I'm sure, to turn yourself into something very tiny, like the smallest toad. So Alberich turns himself into a tiny toad, and immediately Loge puts his foot on top of him and takes the Tarnhelm off of his head. So Alberich, stripped of the magic gold, is just a normal dwarf, and they take him captive and carry him up to Valhalla. Now this may seem to you like an act of thievery. It is. And whether Wagner was talking about the industrial world or colonization or anything, we'll never know. But he created a drama into which we can read just about anything that we like. Back up in Valhalla, Wotan has ordered all of the gold to be brought and given to the giants, Fasolt and Fafnir. They put up 2 stakes and they put Freya in between them, and as the gold is loaded up, they say, once we can't see her anymore, then we're paid. Well, it takes every last speck of gold to build the tower up as high as Freya. And still, Fasolt says, I can see a little bit of hair glinting through that pile. So they're forced to give Fasolt and Fafnir the Tarn helm as well. And Loge says, are you satisfied now? You've taken everything. But Fafnir says, I think there's one tiny speck of light, and I can see the glimmer from Freya's eye. And he makes Wotan give up the golden ring that he's already appropriated, and give the ring to the pile of gold. So now the ring is the property of Fasolt and Fafnir. Well, Alberich curses the ring and curses everybody who comes in contact with it, in addition to causing the strife that it already has. Within moments of owning the ring, Fasolt murders his brother, Fafnir murders his brother Fasolt, and shows right away the danger of possessing this ring, that whoever has this absolute power is cursed to misuse it. The giants go away and the gods are happy. They have their home, they have their Valhalla, and as the opera, Das Rheingold, the gold of the Rhine, comes to an end, they cross a beautiful rainbow bridge into Valhalla. That's all very much in one key, almost in one chord, just the way the Rhine was. In this case, it happens to be D flat major, the Valhalla key. But that calm is only temporary, because Erda, the mother of Brunhilde and her 8 sisters, and the goddess of the earth, has warned Wotan that to come in contact with the ring is perilous for anyone, divine or mortal, and that things can never be the same again. The opening of the second opera, Die Walküre, takes us to a different place on Earth, and characters whom we haven't met yet, but they will all be woven together soon enough. So, the main realm of the Earth, as I said, is largely inhabited by giants. But thanks to Wotan, there are some other races. And a new race, the Welsung, have appeared. One young Welsung man has been orphaned, separated from his father. His mother died giving birth to him. And he is named Siegmund. When the opera Die Walküre opens, Siegmund is running through a storm looking for shelter. And then we start to hear other Leitmotifs. He sees a cottage and decides that this is the only place where he's going to find a roof. So he goes in, and falls asleep from exhaustion in front of the fireplace. And this being opera, moments later, a beautiful young woman walks into the room, spots him, and says, "A stranger, I must take care of him." So she gets him some mead and takes care of him and looks into his face, and pretty soon we start to hear music. And we know that this young woman is falling in love with this young stranger. Unfortunately, the woman is married, and her husband took her as a young girl by force and regards her as his property. His name is Hunding. Now, if you speak German, you already get that it's better to be named Siegmund than Hunding. Sieg means victory, and Hund means dog. So Wagner immediately tells us that the man who is keeping Sieglinde, the beautiful woman, captive, is little better than an animal. And we see this in his behavior. He's very rude to Siegmund. He finds out that the family to which Siegmund belongs are in fact enemies to his kinsmen, and he says, by the laws of hospitality, you may spend one night here, but in the morning I am going to kill you. So Siegmund takes him up on this offer. Sieglinde and Hunding go off to bed, and Siegmund, looking around the room, this is opera, right, sees a tree stump with a sword sticking out of it. Okay? Now we know that this sword must have deep spiritual powers because it's not depicted musically with scalar passages, but with appoggiaturas. It's one big D major chord. So that tells us, in Wagner's language, that this sword is somehow connected to the gods. However, Siegmund doesn't think anymore about that sword. He instead is surprised to see the young woman coming back into the room. And she says, "I gave my husband a potion so that he would sleep for a long time. And it's just you and me right now." So he gets pretty excited, and he sings to her that she is like spring, that in fact, while spring gives life to everything on earth, and the buds blossom and the birds sing, that she has just given new life for the first time to him. This is called Winterstürme. Winterstürme wicken dem Wonnemond. Now, Wagner didn't try to write, Wagner wrote all the words to his own operas, all of them. But he didn't make rhymes in the sense of day and hay and may. Instead, he had the initial consonants of words be the same, so that this alliterative rhyme, Stopprhyme, which went back to the Middle Ages, echoed the time period when these epic myths and legends were created. So, Winterstürme wichen dem Wonnemond, right? This is all throughout the Ring. And if you're listening to the Ring and you hear leicht labte sie den leisen, it's a continuous feature. So now, Sieglinde responds to Siegmund, and she sings to him that he has taken the cold winter of her life and thawed it as in the same way that he has thawed her heart. them sing rapturous love duets, and ultimately, as the curtain falls very quickly, they fall to the floor making love. Arthur Schopenhauer, who was a big fan of Wagner's, said in the first copy that he received, which Wagner asked him to comment on, where it said, "The curtain falls very quickly," Schopenhauer wrote, "Not quickly enough." So in Act 2 of Die Walküre, suddenly we're in a whole different place. Siegmund, well, I didn't finish the story. Siegmund, of course, sees that sword, and Sieglinde explains to him that one night a stranger came and put it there, and since the stranger's name is accompanied by this music, we quickly figure out that the stranger was Wotan himself. So Wotan has left a sword for Siegmund to find. Now, this is a spoiler, I have to tell you this, I won't wait for the movie. Siegmund and Sieglinde turn out to be brother and sister, and their father is none other than Wotan. So, in fact, Wotan has conceived a very long-range plan over several generations to win back the ring. Wotan himself is not allowed to wrest from the giants what is theirs. But, he reasons, if he can create a being who is separate from the gods and completely without fear, why then, perhaps this being can take the ring with impunity and return it, Wotan thinks, to Wotan himself. So, Sieglinde indicates to Siegmund that this sword is there for the taking. Of course, hundreds of people have tried to remove it and failed, but it won't surprise you to know that Siegmund is immediately successful and now has in his possession this great and mighty sword named Nothung, which means in need. When you are in need, this sword is always there. That's Nothung, Nothung, neidliches Schwert. So into battle goes Siegmund in Act 2 with Nothung at his side to kill, he hopes, Hunding. However, there is a complication. I mentioned that Wotan is beyond just your garden variety philanderer. He's been everywhere, and he's immortal. He's had a lot of time to do this. So Fricka, his wife, has had a lot of time to get very resentful about this. And Fricka steps in and says, "You must not allow Siegmund the Valzung to live, because that would say to the world at large that not only is this relationship sanctioned, but they're brother and sister. You must absolutely have Siegmund killed by Hunding." Wotan fights this, but he realizes, as Fricka unfolds her case, that he is absolutely bound by the pact that he has with the universe to observe certain rules, and this is one of them that cannot be changed. So he promises Fricka that he will allow Hunding to kill Siegmund in battle. Brünnhilde, of course, is in charge of bringing the wounded and the dead to Valhalla. So Wotan summons Brünnhilde and explains to her what he wants to have happen. And Brünnhilde fights him on this and says, "You have struggled for a generation to bring forth this Siegmund, and now you want me to allow him to be killed by a common dog." Wotan says, "Don't think about it, just do what I tell you." So Brünnhilde goes to Siegmund and explains to him that he must die. And he says, "Is that absolutely certain?" And she says, "You would not be seeing me if it weren't." Because Brünnhilde, or whichever Valkyrie, is always the last being that a warrior sees before they go to Valhalla. So she explains to him the reasons. this scene, it's revealed that not only have Siegmund and Sieglinde made love, but in fact that Sieglinde is pregnant. So Siegmund goes into battle confident that he will win, even though Brünnhilde has assured him that he will not. And at the last moment, she relents, and her compassion for Siegmund and Sieglinde and their as yet unborn child is so great that she steps in between them and is about to strike the death blow to Hunding when Wotan himself intervenes and shatters Notung, this amazing sword, with his own spear. Of course, the spear of Wotan is even more powerful than a sword that can be wielded by a mortal. And once he's taken care of Siegmund, he flips his hand at Hunding, who dies instantly and does not get to go to Valhalla, and then sets off in hot pursuit of Brünnhilde, because she has really gone against his wishes and he's mad. So he's chasing Brünnhilde across the world, and at this point we get the sisters. Probably all do that as a sing-along, right? We'll do that. We'll do that in a little bit. So the sisters have all been gathering heroes who have died in the battle from the battlefield, and suddenly they realize that Brünnhilde is coming up at top speed, and that close behind her is their father, and he's very unhappy. So as they are singing, and you know what Valkyries sing when they're alone together. We should do all of this, I think, but that would take more than an hour and 15 minutes. So, the sisters are all terrified, because when Wotan gets into a rage, it's not just an ordinary parent-child squabble. It's suddenly volcanoes erupt and there's a huge thunderstorm approaching from the west. Brünnhilde is saying, "Please shield me," and her sisters say, "Are you kidding? There's no way." However, they are willing to take Sieglinde and carry Sieglinde to safety. There's one place that Wotan doesn't really like to go, and that is the cave where Fafnir, who through the magic of the Tarnhelm has turned himself into a gigantic dragon, guards the gold. And the Tarnhelm and the ring, the whole treasure is there in this cave. So somewhere near that cave to the east, the Valkyries take Sieglinde, and she is held safe there, while Brünnhilde has to deal with Wotan's wrath. At first, he says, "I'm going to just throw you on the ground like a common mortal, and the first mortal male that comes along and decides to have you can take you, and you'll be his for life. You'll just be chattel." And she says, "This is not really fair, because while I did disobey you completely, I actually knew what your will was. I did what you and your heart wanted. And what am I? What is Brünnhilde if not the will of Wotan?" Smart girl, right? So he relents somewhat. He says, "All right, I'll still leave you on the ground asleep for eternity until someone comes to find you. However, I will put you in a ring of magic fire, so that only the greatest of heroes will have the courage to break through that circle and claim you as their own." And not having a lot of choice, Brünnhilde thanks him and is is put to sleep in this magic circle of fire. At which time Wagner brings together 3 of the leitmotifs of the Ring. So this is her enchanted sleep. And then we have the music of the fire itself. And we have the Valhalla motif creeping in there as well. So Die Walküre ends like this. This is the announcement of death, Todesverkündung. And again. Brünnhilde is left sleeping in that magic circle of fire, and another generation passes. There's a lot of time between these operas. In this new generation, the baby that Sieglinde was carrying has grown to a very extraordinary teenage boy named Siegfried. Siegfried, of course, was born near the dragon's lair, because that's where Brünnhilde had told her sisters to take him, to take Sieglinde and him. And he's grown up there, fostered by Alberich's brother, Mime. He had a very interesting dowry with him. There was a bag with shards of a sword in it. Now Mime, you may remember, made the Tarnhelm and made the ring, and is quite gifted as a smithy. But there is nothing Mime can do to forge these pieces of steel together and create a sword, because every time he does, Siegfried is able to smash it in seconds. So Mime, who knows the whole story, is going to watch and see and hope that if Siegfried is able to be heroic enough to win that ring back, that Mime will be right on hand to take it for himself, which is pretty much what everybody in this opera is thinking about. How can they be the one to own the ring and dominate the world? Mime leaves Siegfried alone, and in comes Wotan. Now Wotan and Mime have a long conversation which really serves in the opera, if you haven't seen the first two, to bring you up to date on the story. So if you've seen Das Rheingold and if you've seen Die Walküre and you remember everything, the next 5 minutes will just sort of refresh your mind that the giants had the ring, and then one giant killed his brother, the other giant, and that the gods had Valhalla built for them by the giants. So once all of this is completed, Wotan goes on his way and realizes that the time has come for Siegfried himself to try and forge that sword. So Wotan's parting words to Mime are that it's only the person who knows no fear, who can forge this sword. Well, that description would certainly qualify for Siegfried. Siegfried, whom we meet at the beginning of the opera with a bear on a rope. He's completely at home in nature and at home with himself, and he doesn't have anything that frightens him in the least bit. So Mime gives over and allows Siegfried, who's had no experience with this, to melt down the sword completely, and Siegfried hammers Nothung into a new sword, which is apparently indestructible. So off goes Siegfried to the cave of the giant Fafnir. He's asked, what is Fafnir's vulnerability? And Mime has told him, this dragon is invincible. His scales are as hard as iron. His tail, if it touches you, will kill you immediately. The flames and the drips that come out of his nose are poison if you're touched by a single drop. Siegfried says, oh, I guess that means I should be careful. And Mime says, don't you know what fear is? And Siegfried, who is naturally curious, says, no, describe it to me. And Mime says, when you're in the woods and there's a sudden noise in the dark and you see a glimmering of light when you don't know what it is and your heart begins to quiver, that's called fear. And Siegfried says, wow, that sounds really great, but I've never felt that. So he goes off to see what he can do with the dragon. And literally in a few bars of music, which in Wagner's time scale is extraordinarily short, he stabs the dragon right in the center of his heart with the sword, and the dragon falls dead. Well, the dragon sings for another 2 minutes and then falls dead. And while the dragon is singing, he explains a little bit about the history of the world to Siegfried. And then Siegfried gets some of the dragon's blood on his finger and sticks it in his mouth, and is immediately able to understand the language of the wood bird. The wood bird explains what Siegfried needs to do next, and says, in a circle of fire is a beautiful mate, perfect for you. Well, Siegfried goes off, follows the bird, almost has reached the place where the mate would be, when he runs into a man with one eye. And who should that be but Wotan, whom he has never met. Wotan is not willing to tell Siegfried his identity, but it is clear that if Wotan loved Siegmund or if Wotan loved Brünnhilde, he loves this Siegfried even more. He is living proof that even among immortals, grandchildren are really cool. So he gets into a long conversation with Siegfried, and Siegfried just dismisses him. He says, I'm going to take your other eye out if you don't get out of my way. Finally, Siegfried goes on, and Wotan opposes him and puts his staff, Wotan's staff, the symbol of all of his power, all of his cunning, and all of his manipulative dealings, both with gods and humans. Of course, that would be a scale, not an arpeggio. That's Wotan's staff. Siegfried takes that sword and he shatters Wotan's staff. This has never happened. Siegfried then, oblivious of the fact that he's just changed the course of world history, goes to find the prize that has been promised to him. And sure enough, there's a ring of fire. He sees first a horse waiting patiently. It's been waiting there for its rider for, 18 years or so. That's Grana, that's Brünnhilde's horse. And then he sees a soldier on the ground with the breastplate and the helmet. So he carefully uses the sword to cut those off and says the famous opera words, Das ist kein Mann. That is not a man. So he has in fact discovered Brunhilde lying there. And the two of them have a long, rapturous love duet. One part of it I bet you recognize from something else. If you've heard the orchestral piece, the Siegfried idyll, that's the main theme, which Wagner wrote for his wife, Cosima, and apparently on Christmas, their first Christmas together, she came downstairs and he had a whole orchestra in their living room playing this piece for her. So the end of Siegfried is the triumphant love of Brunhilde, who has now sacrificed her divinity with Siegfried, who, though human, is the most heroic of all humans. So the final opera, Götterdämmerung, the Twilight of the Gods, begins with three Norns. Now the Norns weave all of the strands of history together. But as Wotan points out at one time in the opera, they are not able to change, they are only able to know. So the Norns can't alter the fabric of history, but they weave it together. And they serve, if you haven't seen the first three operas, to bring you up to date on what's going to happen before you see Götterdämmerung. But you know all that already, so we don't need to go through that. Now, that's a prelude to the 5 hours of music of Die Götterdämmerung. Act 1 of Die Götterdämmerung begins back down on Earth with a family, the Gibichungs, and the Gibichungs are as follows. There's a brother and sister, Gudrun and Gudrune, and Gudrun's half-brother, Hagen. Now, Hagen is the spawn of Alberich. Even though Alberich has renounced love, he didn't have to renounce sex as long as there was no love. And he has this child, Hagen, who is as evil as a human being could be. So Gudrun and Gudrune are both thinking it's time for them to get married. And who should stride into the Gibichung palace but Siegfried? Well, they give him a potion and they just say, welcome, we would like to toast your arrival, we've heard all about you, we know you're a great hero. And Siegfried, who is as guileless as he is heroic and powerful, drinks this potion down. The potion causes him to forget everything. He forgets Brunhilde, he forgets his love for her, and as they swear brotherhood in the Gibichung family, Gudrune decides that Siegfried would be a good husband for her, and they decide that Brunhilde would be a good wife for Gunther. I've been saying Gudrun, I mean Gunther. So Gunther doesn't have the power or the courage to go through the magic fire circle. Therefore, Siegfried puts on the Tarn helm and assumes the human form of Gudrun. Gunther, whom I keep calling Gunther. He assumes the human form of Gunther, and he goes through the circle, takes Brunhilde by force, and brings her back to the Gibichung. So suddenly we have the very happily and perfectly united couple, Brunhilde and Siegfried, both being married off to other people, the brother and sister Gunther and Gudrune, and Hagen presiding over all of this. Now, at a certain point, Brunhilde realizes that she has been tricked, but she does not realize that Siegfried was given this potion and that he has no memory of her whatsoever. So in a jealous rage, she tells Gunther and Hagen his secret. When he was born, his mother had the option to protect his body with magic spells so that he could never be harmed. But because she knew, being the hero he was, that he would never turn away from a battle, she didn't bother to put the magic on his back. She only put it on his front. So Gudrun and Gunther and Hagen are able to murder Siegfried, stabbing him in the back. So this is what happens. And at last, the magic of the ring is coming toward its home. Siegfried has a funeral march. I'm going to play a little of it for you because I bet you recognize this. Oh, and then Todesfall. The same chords with which the opera Götterdämmerung opens. Now, Brünnhilde realizes that there is no further life for her with Siegfried gone. So she jumps on Grane, her horse, and they have lit an enormous funeral pyre in which Siegfried's body is going to be burned. And Brünnhilde rides her horse Grane right into this, so that she, too, is burned in the same flames that consume Siegfried. And she takes the ring and throws it into the Rhine, returning not just the gold, but all of the power that the ring confers to the Rhine maidens and to the world where it belongs. I say these things in operatic time. When Brünnhilde rides into the fire, she sings a 17-minute aria, the so-called immolation scene, which incorporates many of the leitmotifs that you've learned and heard over the last 15 hours if you go to all the movies. And the extraordinary thing is that Brünnhilde, who is Die Walküre, is able to restore all of the order of the universe, symbolically, without having to rewind the clock. This new race of human champions is born. It's been created and it can't be stopped. But Brünnhilde is still able to go back to the Rhine with that ring. It would be impertinent of me to say that I know what Wagner's meaning is in just about anything. However, I think it's fair to say that there's a certain amount of autobiography in anything that anybody creates, and Wagner felt very strongly that he was a new race of composer, a new race of dramatist, that he was giving to the world a whole new type of drama, a whole new way of looking at drama. And when we have this original race of gods that are powerful but rigid and contained in their thoughts, that needs to be broken open. A new world needs to be unleashed on. And so, in addition to all the other symbolic levels at which the ring cycle can be interpreted, there's also Wagner saying it is time for something new, time for something completely different, time for Richard Wagner. There's a moment in the duet between Fricka and Wotan when she says, "Have you ever heard of a brother and sister treating one another as bride?" And Wotan says, "No, isn't that wonderful? It's completely new. It's never happened before." Now, Fricka shuts him down on that, but it is very much a Wagner thought that something which is completely new, however foreign, however rejected by everybody else, might be the doorway to something new and extraordinary. The end of Götterdämmerung brings us back to Wagner's theme that's so dear to his heart of redemption, redemption through love. Brünnhilde saves the world by sacrificing herself, riding into that fire, and the themes begin to come together at the end of Götterdämmerung like this. So the redemption through love theme. Remember that. These are Rhine maidens. Through love, hidden up there. This is the Valhalla motif, which comes from divinity in a human key with scales going on underneath it. So piecing together all of what we've said, it's Wagner saying, when the gods at their twilight are no more, there is something to take their place that is both divine and human, and therefore would be able to take the motif of Valhalla, bim, pom, 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 combined with bum, ba, bum, ba, bum, ba, bum, bum, and be in C major, a human key, not D flat.